Midnight temptation. The city throbbed with the rhythm of the rain, each drop a caress down the glass, pooling lasciviously in the crevices of the pavement, mirroring the lurid glow of late-night neon signs. The scent of rain-soaked earth fused with the erotic whisper of roses nearby, weaving a tantalizing mix of the primal and the sweet. Her trench coat clung to her voluptuous curves, drenched from the downpour. Raindrops kissed her dark waves, making them cascade around her face in sensual tendrils. Each click of her stilettos on the slick street echoed in the muted excitement of the night as she approached the jazz lounge, a den of dim lights, sultry music, and carnal promises. The bell tingled as she entered, her arrival cloaked in a wave of warmth that caressed her chilled skin. The lounge was steeped in the aromas of roasted coffee and aged bourbon, intertwined with the soulful cry of a saxophone bleeding into the night. There he was, seated alone at the bar, his dark suit immaculate, his broad shoulders dusted with the remnants of the storm. He exuded an aura of restrained power, his presence both commanding and discreetly magnetic. He swirled his glass thoughtfully, muscles rippling under the fine fabric of his suit as his gaze slowly lifted to meet hers. His eyes, dark and penetrating, held a promise of what was to come, intense, unbridled desire. A pulse of excitement surged within her as she took the stool next to him, shedding her coat to reveal the silk dress that hugged her body like a second skin, its dampness accentuating every curve. "Good evening," his voice rumbled, a deep velvet tone laced with a hint of something more primal.
"Evening,"
she responded, her voice a sultry melody, her lips parting to let her tongue dart out and savor the raindrop lingering there. She caught the flicker in his eyes as he watched, his gaze tracing the movement with evident desire. He observed her intently, his stare unabashedly hungry as she ordered a whiskey, neat, the liquid fire to match the heat building between them. "You don't seem like the usual clientele," he observed, his voice smooth as he took a sip of his bourbon, eyes never leaving her.
her lips curled into a mischievous smirk. "Do you?"
His response was a low, enticing chuckle. "Maybe I am." The silence that hung between them then was electric, charged with the energy of their mutual scrutiny. Every minor shift, every lingering look added layers to their silent conversation. Outside, a bolt of lightning momentarily brightened the sky, the subsequent dimming of the lounge lights drawing them closer in the shadowed ambiance. "The storm's intensity tonight is stimulating," he mused, his body angling towards her subtly, their knees almost touching.
"It does seem to heighten certain appetites,"
she murmured, her voice low, her breath a warm whisper against his ear. His smile was slow, knowing. "Is that what this is then?"
"Maybe it's exactly what we need it to be."
She teased back, her hand reaching out to lightly touch his, her fingers tracing his pulse point provocatively. He leaned closer, his scent, a mix of rain, whiskey, and pure man, enveloping her, intoxicating her senses. "Ever flirt with danger?" he whispered, his breath hot against her neck. Her reply came as a breathy sigh.
"Only when danger is worth the burn."
His intake of breath was sharp, his gaze locked onto hers, fiery and alive with a fierce need. As they spoke, their conversation peppered with innuendos. Their proximity eliminated any pretense of distance. When she checked the time, the night had deepened, the lounge now a quiet backdrop to their escalating tension.
I really should get home.
Her voice was reluctant, laden with unspoken invitations as she made no move to leave. He captured her gaze, intense and unyielding. Allow me to walk you. Without a word, she agreed. Their walk was a slow burn of contact, each touch under the amber streetlights igniting sparks that threatened to engulf them. By the time they reached her door, the night air was thick with the scent of rain and raw desire.
I enjoyed tonight.
She breathed, her hand resting on the door, her body leaning subtly towards his. So did I, he murmured, moving closer, his heat enveloping her. And it doesn't have to end here. His words were a velvet growl that sent shivers down her spine.
Then let it continue.
Her whisper was an invitation, her body now a mere breath away from his. His response was a low growl of approval, his hands reaching up to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch lingering, tracing the line of her jaw, down to the nape of her neck. She trembled, anticipation coiling tightly within her. I should be responsible, he confessed, his voice husky, even as his fingers sketched fire down her throat, over her collarbone, to the edge of her neckline. Her lips parted in a tantalizing challenge.
Or you could be unforgettable.
With a ragged exhale, his restraint crumbled. Once inside, the world outside ceased to exist. Their chemistry, a palpable force pulling them inexorably together. She backed against her door, her eyes locked on his, full of wanton promise.
You're so quiet all of a sudden.
Her tone was teasing, provocative. I'm thinking about all the ways I'm going to have you. His voice was a dark whisper that made her moan softly. She pushed back against the wood, her body arching towards him, her breath quickening. His hands were on her then, strong and commanding, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that seared her soul. His tongue delved deeply, claiming her, as his hands roamed over her, mapping the terrain of her body with a possessiveness that left her gasping. He pressed her against the cool glass of her living room window, the lights of the city a distant backdrop to their urgent need. She wrapped her legs around his waist, the fabric of her dress riding up, exposing her more to his hungry gaze.
Someone might see?
She gasped, caught between caution and the wild thrill of being exposed. Let them watch, he growled, his hands deftly unzipping her dress, letting it fall to the floor, leaving her bare and vulnerable under his intense gaze. His mouth traveled down her body, worshiping her with kisses, each touch a spark that threatened to ignite her into flames. Her hands clawed at his back, pulling him closer, needing more of his heat, his strength, his overwhelming masculinity. She moaned, her body moving against his with a desperation born of raw desire. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking with need. He lifted her higher against the window, the cold glass a stark contrast to the heat of their bodies. With a fierce thrust, he was inside her, filling her completely, stretching her, the pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. "Tell me you want this." His voice was rough, commanding.
I want you.
She cried out, her voice loud in the quiet of the night. "Please, make me yours." He responded with a growl, his movements becoming more urgent, more demanding. Each thrust pushed her closer to the edge, her cries of pleasure echoing in the space around them. She felt every barrier break, every wall crumble as she clung to him, her body responding to every hard, deep stroke. Her world narrowed to the raw intensity of his touch, the sound of their union filling the air, the wet slap of skin against skin.
Harder.
She gasped, her voice a desperate plea. He obliged, his pace relentless, pushing her towards a precipice she was all too eager to tumble over. His growl mingled with her moans, a primal sound that seemed to echo off the walls. She arched against him, her climax building, overwhelming in its intensity. With a final, powerful thrust, she shattered, her scream mingling with the storm outside, her body convulsing in wave after wave of exquisite release. He followed, his own release claimed by her spasming warmth, his name falling from her lips in a litany as he filled her, marking her as his own. Gradually, their frantic movements stilled, and they remained locked in embrace, his body shielding hers against the cool glass, their breaths mingling, heavy and satisfying. The city below continued its restless hum, oblivious to the tempest of passion that had just occurred above. They stood together, her head resting against his chest, listening to the rhythmic beat of his heart, feeling the aftershocks of their intimacy.
Stay, she whispered.
Not ready to break the magical spell that enveloped them. He kissed her forehead tenderly, a silent affirmation. "Nothing could pull me away," he murmured, his voice a soothing balm to her heated skin. As the night deepened, they moved together to the softness of her bed, their bodies entwined, exploring each other further, deepening their connection until the first light of dawn crept through the window. In the tranquility of post-passion, wrapped in the warmth of shared sheets, the storm outside had nothing on the storm that raged between them. Midnight temptation had turned into a promise of countless nights filled with unbridled passion. And as they lay there, the city's pulse finally slowing, they knew neither of them would ever regret the night when the storm brought them together, when rain painted their first chapter in bold strokes of lust and connection. Midnight temptation had won, indeed, and it whispered of many more nights to come. Neither of them would regret it,